Dearest Fear, creativity and I are about to go on a road trip together. I understand you'll be joining us because you always do. I acknowledge that you believe you have an important job to do in my life and that you take your job seriously. Apparently, your job is to induce complete panic whenever I'm about to do anything interesting. And may I say, you are superb at your job. So, by all means, keep doing your job if you feel you must. But I will also be doing my job on this road trip, which is to work hard and stay focused. And creativity will be doing its job, which is to remain stimulating and inspiring. There's plenty of room in this vehicle for all of us, so make yourself at home. But understand this: creativity and I are the only ones who will be making any decisions along the way. I recognize and suspect you are part of this family and respect you are part of this family. And so I will never exclude you from our activities. But still, your suggestions will never be followed. You're not allowed to have a seat and you're not allowed to have a voice, but you're not allowed to have a vote. You're also not allowed to touch the road maps. You're not allowed to suggest detours. You're not allowed to fiddle with the temperature. Dude, you're not even allowed to touch the radio. But above all else, my dear old familiar friend, you're absolutely forbidden to drive. So, what qualifies me to talk about fear? Well, absolutely nothing. I don't hold a PhD in psychiatry. I don't work for a research institute. I'm not part of a think tank. I don't even recognize the full depths of the levels of my internal voices dragging me into and out of the present moment of my life. So, what makes me actually qualified? Well, I'm human. And that in itself is qualification enough. I've lived through enough hurts and pains, interacted and hurt others through my actions and sometimes my interactions. But there's something else. I'm willing to witness my fear. So 2.5 years ago, this was the reminder on my phone on every day for several weeks, probably even months. And what I had to do was I had to stop what I was doing and witness my fear. So did it go away? No. But over time, it started to get just a little bit smaller, a little less noticeable as I went about my day and kind of went through the parts and pieces of my life. Because at the core of fear, oftentimes we're dealing with something more, not more than false evidence, which is appearing real. This false evidence doesn't oftentimes appear apparent to us because fear, well, it doesn't actually start with F, it starts with what if. What if this person rejects me? What if what I'm doing doesn't matter? What if I can't make any money? What if I've lost all that I built? Or what if I lose all that I built? What if, what if, what if? So as we spend time together today, the real reason I qualify or here is because I choose to be here to share my story, my path, and maybe it'll help you in some part on your own creative journey and journeys, but also because I've been there. So I was raised in the high mountains of Western Colorado by two hippies, my father, David, with the beard, and my mother, Susan. Fear, though, wasn't called fear in our house. Fear hid under the pretense of workaholism and alcoholism for my father, and under perfectionism and anxiety with my mother. Neither of my parents, unfortunately, have been willing to face their fears and, as such, medicated away for most of their lives, which worked until it didn't. Their drugs of choice, beyond even what I speak about here, could no longer hold their pain and fears within. In 2014, my father retired. All of the things he had never had time to deal with in his life came front and center. Our relationship actually improved for a little while, and then it didn't. It was during the rise of Trump that my father seemed to find a new voice. This once peace loving hippie, lifelong Democrat, NPR supporter changed almost overnight. In May of 2017, I had given my father one of my first professionally printed pictures. I had printed and produced this one. It was one that he actually liked. It was the glorious 20 by 30 metal, my expression of the natural world and that some of the transformations I'd gone through. He displayed it in the living room of his house. All my life, my father had searched for an outlet to his pain of losing his own father to suicide, battled financial demons and fears that he was really never able to escape. In July of 2017, though, he found his outlet. And unfortunately for me, it was me. I was now the cause of his troubles and his problems. Over the coming months, our relationship imploded. In very quick succession, I received this note from my father, and shortly after, the print showed back up at my door. My father had chosen to expunge me from his life. This put me into an interesting observation or an interesting point in time. And I went through what's called different levels of the Kubler-Ross grief cycle. This 5-stage process is well discussed to help people move through and understand what stages they are at and to understand what is next and what healing might look like for them. Through my father's actions, my subsequent reactions, and my interactions with myself, I was challenged to see the gifts that were coming, to become what Elizabeth Kubler-Ross describes as beautiful people. The most beautiful people we have known are those who've known defeat, known suffering, known struggle, known loss, and have found their way out of the depths. These persons have an appreciation, a sensitivity, and an understanding of life that fills them with compassion, gentleness, and a deep loving concern. Beautiful people do not just happen. So I miss my dad. Our relationship was far from perfect, but he was still my dad. And I can have compassion for him and what he's gone through. I can wish him the best on the journey and the path he's on. But I still hold some sadness. I've been not able to share with him any of my journey into becoming a professional photographer. But in a weird way, his dismissal helped me to find my way and to look these fears directly in the eye, to make a choice to pursue the creative life, not by chance, but by choice. So what is creative living? Well, it's living a life that is driven more strongly by curiosity than it is by fear. It's having the stubbornness to accept our gladness in the ruthless furnace of this world. To live that creative life, we must lose our fear of being wrong. But it's also the moments we stop worrying. So what creative living is finding ways and places that fear hides right in front of us in our day-to-day life. These little things that we don't necessarily label as fear, like perfectionism, anxiety, people pleasing, addiction, withdrawal, resistance, laziness, resistance to deadlines, irritation with our surroundings, distraction over the achievements of others, and the list goes on. Procrastination, fantasy thinking. So of these, we have major power resistor, the most powerful ways that fear hides. These are the areas that will limit us the most. Procrastination. It's the easiest for us to rationalize. None of us ever say we're never going to create great images, or we're never going to learn something, or we're never going to do something. We just put it off till tomorrow. Then we have fantasy thinking, these magical breakthroughs, major changes, versus just the discipline to actually sit down and continue to do the work. Addiction. I'm not looking about the complete or talking about the complete ways of those that destroy our lives, but yet a lot of these different parts and pieces, these ways we look to bypass or discount some portion of our pain as we go through. So creating our work is a slow process. We have to avoid over-glorification and preoccupation with what others are doing. But addiction can sometimes also take the form of woe is me. Too many people become addicted to the concept of suffering. And then we have perfectionism. Yes, the top portion of this cocktail of all that we face. And Rebecca Solnit puts it well. As so many of us believe in perfection, which ruins everything else, because the perfect is not only the enemy of the good, it is also the enemy of the realistic, the possible, and the fun. Perfectionism stops people from completing their work, but even worse, it often stops people from even beginning their work. Perfectionists often decide in advance that the end product is never going to be satisfactory, so they don't even bother to be creative in the first place. So what thing next is to understand more about fear. It is everywhere. When we tune into what it looks like, we will start to see it. But we need to know how to tackle this. Where do we even start? We have seen that fear manifests in other forms, but it also sometimes lurks beneath the surface. What we oftentimes feel is that lurking fear, something like that other shoe is going to drop. This lurking fear is that someone is going to figure out something about me. Something is going to happen to me. There's just no way I can do it. I can't. I never, or I should. When you find yourself in these patterns, think of the words of Wendell Johnson. Always and never are two words you should always remember to never use. Or think of the starfish. He doesn't always end up out of the water. This shouldn't be happening to him. The world doesn't ever seem to go his way, but eventually he will find his way back into the water. Part of this lurking fear is essentially dealing with two things: that which is known to ourselves and to others, and that which is unknown. Without knowing it, much of the time we are in what is called the Johari window. The obvious or the open things, the things that are known by you and also seen or acknowledged by others. The blind, things that we are not aware of about ourselves, but we're seen and acknowledged by others. That which is hidden, a part of ourselves that we know, but we choose to hide from other people. And the area of the most mystery, the unknown, what is unknown by ourselves and also unknown by others. So let's look at this image. What is known to self and known to others as we look at this picture of the Tetons and the moose. It's known that it's a sunrise morning. It's known that there's a moose moving through the scene, that we have fog, we have depth, we have reflections, we have different types of color. These are all things that will be readily acknowledged. Then there's the things that are known to others, but they're unknown to me, my blind spots. As a photographer, as photographers, as creatives, we have these. We become emotionally attached to scenes so much we can't see obvious defects or obvious problems. Other people would look at the image and point out things that they feel are not in line or don't work, or things maybe I haven't noticed, etc. This is the value of the critique process in healthy ways. This is the value of looking at our images and having other people look at them. Then we have the known to self but unknown to others. So you guys don't know that this image is actually two images put together. One image taken at 6:50 a.m., one image taken at 6:51 a.m. So as I got up to move away after I captured the beautiful scene, the moose ran into my scene. And as I struggled to recompose myself in this faint light, I couldn't get the Tetons in focus. So I have a picture with the moose in the scene with the Tetons not in focus, and I could choose to completely scrap it, not show it, or blend my exposures from less than a minute together. So these are the things that are unknown. Is it deceptive? Absolutely not. Is the same image taken at the same time, less than a minute apart. And then there's the unknown portion, that which is unknown to me and unknown to others. Maybe the reason the moose ran into the scene was being chased by a bear or a wolf. Maybe the moose had a particular spot it needed to go or was doing something else. Or maybe there was other mystery of the whole scene as itself, all of these unknown parts and pieces. So what if I didn't show this picture if it wasn't perfect? What if I deleted it? What if I went back to the same spot every day until I got the perfect image? What if? Avoid getting trapped in these perils of perfectionism because we have plenty of other ways that fear plays the what if games. If we are feeding the fear monster, these are not lurking fears we're talking about. These are things we're a little more aware of, where we start to say things like, well, we're afraid we have no talent. We're afraid we'll be rejected or criticized or ridiculed or misunderstood or worst of all, ignored. You're afraid there's no market for your creativity and therefore no point in pursuing it. You're afraid that everyone else has already done it better. Or maybe you're afraid that you won't be taken seriously, or you're afraid your dreams themselves are actually embarrassing, or you're afraid that someday you'll look back on your creative endeavors as having been a giant waste of time, effort, and money. You're afraid you don't have the right kind of discipline. You're afraid you don't have the kind of workspace or financial freedom or empty hours in which to focus on invention or exploration. You're afraid you don't have the right kind of training. You're afraid of being exposed as a hack, a fool, a narcissist. You're afraid of what your peers, your family, your coworkers will say if you express your personal truth. You're afraid your best work is behind you. Or maybe you're afraid you never had any best work to begin with. The list goes on and on. We've neglected our creativity. Something went well in our life, it can't go well again. You're afraid of being a one-hit wonder. You're afraid of being a no-hit wonder. So as we look at these different fears, we find things that are more specific. And let's talk about the levels of fear. Well, there's certain things that happen. They're bound to happen. We will all change, age, and die. Even death is somewhat of a form of retirement. So people say, oh, I'm not going to retire. Well, when you die, you're actually retiring from life. And at the end, when we all die, we lose that financial security that we've worked so hard to maintain. So as we work, how can we be aware of those things and carry them into our work? Well, we can put things into perspective. This is where we can establish goals. We can look towards projects. We can know that our time is limited. In some places we will never see, while others we should take or make the time to go and see these places while we still have that time. So that capability to look at what we have for finite time and put goals and objectives in place to get that. The second level of fear is where things start to get a little sticky. These are the fears that are driven by our ego. Our perceptions of rejection, success, failures, vulnerabilities, disapprovals. This is where we let other people's opinions influence us, where we place too much emphasis in the places where it doesn't belong. So rewind to 2017, and I wanted to see Horseshoe Bend just outside of Page, but I don't actually think it was for reasons other than my ego. I wanted this image to be accepted, to find success among the social media parts of the world I was part of back then. And for me, seeking to conform made it easier for me to gain success. Allowing my ego to drive parts of this process took away from any creativity and placed me in a place where failure was judged by the quality of my image and not by the experience of me actually being in nature. So level 3, I would say this one is the core fear that many of us hold. It's the belief we can't handle whatever comes our way. So photography, the creative life, however you want to look at it, is incredibly rewarding, but it can also be incredibly challenging. For me, to know I could handle whatever Death Valley threw my way this morning was greatly rewarding. Well, it was mid-20s. Yeah, so I had to do some jumping jacks that morning to stay warm as I waited. I had extreme dynamic range. So I knew I could bracket to keep things. I had focal length drop off. Well, I could do a focal length blend. I needed focus throughout. Well, I could focus stack. So knowing I could handle whatever came my way that day was strangely empowering. I also knew that photographically speaking, even if I can't handle a challenge that comes my way, I can regroup and try again, because fear in itself actually has two meanings. Forget everything and run, or face everything and rise. And ultimately, we as creatives have the choice. Just as we made the choice to why do we choose photography? And I'm turning to Ted Bayless or David Bayless and Ted Orland to talk about this. The need to make art may not stem solely from the needs to express who you are, but from a need to complete a relationship with something outside of yourself. As a maker of art, you are the custodian of issues larger than self. So why do we choose this? Many of us choose to be outside or to be creative, to shut off the troubles, to practice some elements and levels of escapism, experience solitude, expression of some part of us, a way for us to process our emotions, to discover new purpose, or to capture or display some elements of time. So some of you indicated in your responses to the question that you're early in this journey. Others have been around the block for quite a few years. So what we can both share, we can both look at and examine is these three questions. What happens if you never get anything out of this? What happens if you pursue your passion forever, but success never comes? How will you feel then, having wasted your entire life for nothing? So depending on your answers to this, and hopefully your answer to that third question, we're going to expose some of the truths about fear. So what is truth number one? Our fear will never go away as long as I continue to grow. Yes, if you stagnate and don't do anything new, your fear might actually wither away. but you will not be growing on this process. And so take night photography as an example. Every time I go out, it feels like I forgot everything I learned. Most of the time I'm by myself. Too often I'm in a fog, as I do like my sleep, and it's often in the middle of the night. And time again, I can't get my processing to turn out exactly the way I want or what I envisioned. But yet I persist. Every time I go out, I lessen that fear just a little bit. I grow just a little bit more in my photography and my vision and how I see things out there. The second truth about fear is the only way to get rid of your fear is to go out and do it. So my last trip to Utah, I got up way too early, drove way too far to a place my buddy actually that knew the area could barely find. And as we emerged from the car into strong winds and the 1,000-foot cliff I was atop, my photography was challenged because I had never seen this scene before, and yet I wanted to take in and capture the moment. My first processing of this scene was a mess. I lost my contrast, didn't have the sky or the beams that were coming over the way I wanted. So I could have called it good, could have chosen not to show the image, or I could try again. Round two, ego aside, I tried again. I took a different approach. Is this processing itself perfect? Probably not. The sky itself looks a little more purple than I remember that particular day, and I can fix that later after I sit on and let the rest of the image kind of rest. But what I was able to do is overcome that fear of, oh God, I didn't get it right. I should get this right, and move on and try again, which is the third fear. The truth that those that we admire are not fearless. They have just learned to push through. So after 6 failed permit attempts to hike the subway in Zion over 4 years, I guess, the permit finally came through. Was I afraid? No, not really. But I had learned I needed to keep pushing. And oftentimes when I keep trying for something, the rewards are actually worth it, like this day. So the other permits I tried were always in the fall to get the beauty of the fall colors in there, etc. But in the spring, I was the only person in this magical place for about 45 minutes. And so my persistence and patience paid off. Just like truth number 4, pushing through fear is less frightening when living with the feeling of helplessness. There's probably very little in our lifetimes that has been as disruptive as these last 13 months. Yes, this is in the time of COVID. I had geared up in 2020 for a year of art shows, expanding my gallery work, a whole host of other things. Rewind a year ago, and I'd yet to teach an online class, but I took the leap. On April 20th of 2020, 357 days ago, I conducted my first Zoom webinar. I had 14 people that day show up. Tonight, we had 278 people register, and we have over 180 with us right now. I had to push through my fears many times over these last 12 months, finding the courage to contact camera clubs, starting meetups, refunding customers that didn't like my product, dealing with people that have said unkind things to me, seeing subscribers come and go. But you know what? This all takes me to that final truth. We cannot escape fear. We can only transform it as a companion that accompanies us. So all the great things is you don't have to take my word for it, nor do you have to understand that I still experience some fears and doubts. Maybe it's not always fear, it's doubt when I'm photographing. Do I still think my images are not good enough? Well, somewhat. But I keep doing it, and I see the progress, and I keep getting better and better, which is similar to over 200 people that responded back to this question. What do you think holds you back in your photography? Self-imposed limitations. Confidence in my ability is too much of a people pleaser, so I've been photographing for others and not myself. I like nightscapes, but I fear shooting alone. If only I had a better camera. Not being comfortable in my own skin as a photographer, unrealistic expectations. Not using the skills I've learned. Fear of sharing photos that aren't perfect or unique. So I've categorized these into a list, and I'm going to keep adding as the questions come in of what holds you back. I broke it into 7 areas. Some of these that can be solved almost instantaneously. Others may be never solved, like physical limitations. Health and aging was a theme that came through with a lot of people. They don't simply have the physical body to go out and experience like they could before. Others will require more time. These are all things we can get over or work through or accept or adapt as we work through. So let's talk about some of the ways to work through. So the pain to power vocabulary, this comes credit of the book, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway, which I'll talk about at the end. And one of the ways to work through our fears is to work through the pain to power way of understanding our limitations and fears and knowing we always have a choice. So rather than saying, I can't photograph night photography scenes or images, just simply say, I won't. It's okay to define areas you don't want to do, to be able to say things you don't want to express, things you just simply don't have the interest in. I don't want to put the work in to learn it. That's a perfectly fine answer versus I can't. That's not acceptable. So looking at it as I should or I could. I should be out there photographing. I should photograph more. I should have caught that sunrise. I should. How about I could? I could photograph more. I could get up this morning and go out for a photo. I could photograph. Remove a little bit of that pressure to produce and find what you're going for, which is similar to it's not my fault. It's not my fault I didn't get a great sunset. It's not my fault I couldn't get the information. It's not my fault I didn't capture the scene the way I saw it versus I'm totally responsible. I'm responsible for what I get out of the scenes when I'm out there. I'm responsible for how I choose to capture. I'm responsible for going out again and again if I don't get it, which is similar to it's a problem. No, it's actually an opportunity. Seeing the landscape scenes, not for the problems they represent, but the opportunity to solve these things you're dealing with, the variables, get things to align in your favor. I'm never satisfied. How about I want to learn and grow? Am I satisfied with my first time shooting seafoam? I don't know. There's some elements I like to it. There's some elements like, wow, but I get the opportunity to learn and grow just like this. Life's a struggle. Well, life's actually an adventure. The places we go time and time again give us that opportunity to find just a little bit more, to discover more, to go back to places again and again and keep working on our images. Just like I hope for that great sunset. I hope I'll get that picture. I hope versus I know. And the ultimate of I know is I know I'm going to enjoy my time out there. I know I'm working on my creativity. I know I'm giving it the best I can give it. If only, how about next time? If only I'd had this. If only the sun had come through. How about next time? Let's keep trying. Let's keep going out. Or what will I do? Transforming this into I know I can handle it. This is Yosemite. This was in the same period of time for the Neowise comet. So I photographed the Milky Way looking to the south, turned around and changed my lens and photographed the Neowise comet to the north. I knew I could handle it from that standpoint, just like it's terrible. No, it's a learning experience. Yes, this front portion of this image is not in focus. I had the flower too close to my minimum focus distance. So I can make the choice and the decision. It's a terrible image versus saying it's a learning experience. Now I have an excuse to go back out into nature, back out into a field of lupine and back off my lens just a little bit to create what I'm seeing. So what are some ways we can work through our fear? The first, it's a concept I'd like to call relevant criticism. And my friends from Headspace, the meditation app I use, have a good one. They say praise and criticism are two sides of the same coin. If we believe in one, we believe in the other. Better not to get too attached to either. So rather than avoid both or focus too much emphasis on both, I talk about what is relevant. Well, relevant criticism is not, I don't like that picture. That's not relevant criticism, but it's seeking out criticism I need to be aware of and understand what is and what is not relevant to me. So if you were to tell me I like the flow within this image, Nick, but your lower rapids, they look a little bit blown out, that is relevant to me. I then have a choice to live with that or take steps to fix that or correct that. Just the same way as you could say, I like much of your work, but this one doesn't hit on all cylinders or I don't connect with it. That's perfectly perfectly acceptable relevant criticism versus just saying this is a horrible image or this is, you don't have any talent, which is things that sometimes we will say to ourselves as we go through. And then we get into what I call the trifecta of creation: acceptance, rejection, and approval. How do these three things play off and work together? So we all want our work to be accepted by others. We don't want it dismissed as a craft, a hobby, a decoration, or nothing at all. We want it to be counted as the real thing. That doesn't mean we need it to be loved or liked, just that we have the skills needed to produce an image that the way we want it to look and our craft is accepted as something that's the real thing. On the other side of this is approval. Approval means having people like it. But if we court to an audience, that puts a dangerous amount of power into their hands. This can vary dramatically. For someone that needs to make an income off selling their work, approval is probably something that's needed. The difficulty also lies in the very nature of doing our work is we risk rejection. Exposing our own personal side of personal representation of who we are, there is no way to avoid taking some portion of that criticism personally. So people try to avoid rejection and embrace acceptance by following well-explored paths. They only photograph icons or images they think will be accepted and approved by others. And at the center of all of this is doing our own work. This is where we find what we need to make things really work for us, which ultimately takes me to the reality of creativity. It's almost impossible to have all three of these things align. Thinking you can be accepted, approved, and not risk rejection on images is not a realistic representation. So for us, as we do our work, we need to pick one or maybe two of these to focus on and be okay with things not being approved, things not being accepted, or maybe things being rejected. What's one of the things? So let's discover, or as we do this, we start to discover some of our own creative truths. The first truth, I would say, or one of the other truths, is the secret to photography. The secret of photography, it's not hard. What is hard is having the discipline to stick with it. The early mornings, the complex processing, the creative blocks, the finding time to dedicate to our craft, discovering where we want to take things, what we want to do. Those are the hard parts and pieces, going through those downward parts that we experience. Same point in time is to take a joy every day in the wonder of our craft. How do things work? What exists out there? How things are created? Asking and trying to answer what guides our soul. Go back to Elizabeth Gilbert. My soul is not guided by dreams of praise or fears of criticism. My soul doesn't even have a language for such notions. My soul, when I tend to it, as far more expansive and faceted and a fascinating source of guidance than my ego will ever be. Because what my soul desires is only one thing, wonder. And since creativity is my most efficient pathway to wonder, I take refuge there and it feeds my soul. So this becomes how we approach our work. It's a very personal part of our journey. And while we're at different levels of our creativity, and whether we're professional photographers in the standpoint where we make an income or living, or hobbyists or amateurs, we can all adopt a professional mindset. And what the professional mindset means is the professional dedicates themselves to mastering techniques, not because they believe technique is a substitute for inspiration, but because they want to be in possession of skills when inspiration does come. Because ultimately, creativity is a gift not just for the audience, but also the gift to the creator. So as we work through, let's take the time and stand up and declare our intent. Our creativity and ourselves, sometimes others, our creativity and ourselves needs to be declared to others, to the world. We need to know that we're open to new ideas, make our intentions clear. We need to clear the space for it and respond to what we're seeing. And so that exposes one of the final truths we'll talk about. None of this is easy, but it's interesting. Yes, photography is something we must do daily. We must vow to continue to do the work regardless of the result. When we can't ask for it to be easy, but we can ask for it to be interesting. Learning how to endure disappointment and frustration, is part of the job as a creative. Frustration is a fundamental aspect of the work. Fundamentally, perhaps the single most important aspect of the work. It's not an interruption in our process. It is the process. As creatives, we don't just leap from bright moments to bright moments. We have these downward parts. And how can we pull ourselves through? Well, it's not about outworking what we did yesterday, nor does it have to be about productivity or even the quality of our work. It's about finding these elements of ritual. How can you go back and refine yourself a little bit every day? Step one for me is mindfulness. I devote a little bit of time every day to getting in touch with what I feel within my body. I become more aware of my fears. I also have a daily reading plan. For you, it can be one page, one chapter, maybe one book. That's pretty ambitious. Doesn't matter, but that daily dedication to learning something new and expanding. Writing, I have a daily writing ritual, giving credence and value to our thoughts makes just a little bit of order about all the things that are going on, and maybe even some element of a spiritual practice. Whether you pray to a God, maybe you pray to Taco Bell or nature, it doesn't matter. What we're doing to try to do is expressing that gratitude for life. Through that gratitude, we find a lot of that humility. And when we're holding gratitude and humility, we cannot hold fear together. So, the thing I want to leave you with is to ask yourself these questions. These three questions, when we look at our images and our process, what we're trying to do, what was I trying to achieve? Did I succeed? Was it worth doing? Because, in the words of Whitman, the powerful play goes on and you may contribute a verse. So, thanks for joining Fear and Photography. Hope to see you for an upcoming class.